Rebecca Reardon is the Vice President of New South Wales Farmers. And Rebecca, you're joining us today to talk about concerns about the best farming land, including in the south of the state, being under threat. Why is that?
New South Wales Farmers undertook an exercise of mapping out what is considered state significant farmland, which is our best farmland in New South Wales, against what they've defined as critically endangered ecological communities. And there's 9.5 million hectares of our best farming land. 6 million of that, or 63%, is actually also classified as critically endangered ecological communities. And it's making it very difficult for us to, do our routine activities to be able to grow food and fibre, because it's turning off a lot of our land management codes and our ability to operate.
Yeah, so in a practical sense, a farmer wants to, harvest or till or something like that. Where are they being slipped up by these ecological requirements?
Well, if we're turning around and we want to do things like clear invasive regrowth, which is often, littered with weeds, we can no longer just go and do that or get permission from LLS to do that. So it's those sort of activities which are actually really important to also have effective conservation as well and be able to manage the land. I mean, the fact is quality is becoming far more important in terms of being recognised as getting better conservation results than quantity. So to put a blanket across, most of our farming land in the state is just not getting the desired result.
Now, is there an overlay here? You talk about ecologically significant land, but what about oil and gas and other mineral exploration? Is there a problem there as well?
There is actually. On this land that is supposedly critically endangered ecological communities, there's also 500,000 or 500,000 hectares of that. It's also got petroleum export licences over it. So if it is critically endangered, why on earth are we putting petroleum export licences over it?
Yeah, it's a good question. And also on top of all of that, I don't know if you've looked into this, is these transmission lines and solar farms going on farming land as well.
Absolutely. I mean, the farmers are increasingly having to take on this public infrastructure and they're not being paid for it. And I think there's a few things that come out of it. We've got to stop this land conflict and we need to start talking to the farmers rather than imposing these things upon them. I mean, when it comes to things like, conservation, farmers love the land. We want to conserve the land. That is what we do. We are stewards. But they're not talking to us about how we can actually do that to get a better result and get quality outcomes and not this quantity which they just seem to be going for at the moment. And scientists and ecologists are all recognising quality is really producing a far better result. We're getting better biodiversity by effectively managing the land than if we left it and didn't manage it, and then your production areas are going to have a better biodiversity outcome.
Rebecca Reardon is the Vice President of New South Wales Farmers. We're talking about these plans on ecological grounds and oil and gas exploration grounds that restrict what farmers can do on their land. Why isn't there a food security overlay on all of that? Why isn't that an equal priority to those other two issues?
Let's face it, food and fibre should be a basic right for everybody. And if we can't actually produce that, people can't eat and people can't be clothed. So that's a really great point. And it's a question we're asking. We need departments to be talking. They need to be working with farmers and not just imposing these nonsense stuff on farmers without really understanding the land themselves. And one of the things we're actually also calling for is an independently fully resourced ag commissioner who can ground truth these maps. Because at the end of the day, the farmers and I think the whole of society, we want to have good results for food and fibre as well as our conservation, but we can't do it the way we're actually doing it at the moment. It's not working.
Now, you used an interesting term there, ground truth these maps. Is there a bit of bull dust involved there?
We have doubt. It's, nearly 6.5 million hectares is actually ecologically endangered. There is certainly parts of it which deserves the conservation, and that's where we need to work with farmers to identify those areas and make sure that we are actually conserving them correctly, getting the biodiversity results we want, and paying our farmers to be able to do this, because the big stick approach is not working.
Well, I noticed liaising with your office about the local impact in the Riverina of electorates like Albury and Murray. For instance, Albury, apparently there's less than 1% of that is state significant agricultural land. So there must be a register of some sort of what is significant, but why is only 1% of that part of the Riverina significant for agriculture?
I couldn't answer that, and that's part of the problem. They need to be talking to us and to the farming community about what is considered state agriculture, significant agricultural land, what genuinely has, conservation value that we need to actually be looking at how we actually do that.
Absolutely, and I notice in the electorate of Murray, apparently there's 1.1 million hectares of that ecologically, I forget the long term for it, preserved land that is on state significant agricultural land. So even though it's been earmarked as one, it's got that overlap that's probably going to make things difficult to farm it.
Yeah, and that's precisely the point. When you've got 2/3 of your state significant land is actually critically endangered, which means it imposes a whole lot of restrictions, we're not getting the outcomes that we want. Either in conservation or in farming.
And I notice, just looking at the election commitments that have been made so far, it does sound like the Labor opposition are committing to a fully independent agricultural commissioner, but it doesn't sound like the coalition are yet on that same level.
Yeah, and we need both parties to step up and actually do this. And I think this is the perfect example of why we actually need someone who's going to be able to form that connection between the departments, who has an agricultural focus, be able to increase the coordination, communication with farmers and ground truth, things like these maps, rather than departments operating independently and producing maps which have no consideration for what effect it's having on other areas in terms of farming on conservation or vice versa.
That is your Vice President for New South Wales Farmers, Rebecca Reardon, talking with us today here on Flow FM about the conflicting land uses and just where agriculture stands amongst it all. Rebecca, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks very much, Ricky. Okay.